From years of anxiety to warrior and mentor, Bradley Robinson created the Anxiety Project to help you end your anxiety naturally. Let's mold the new you and let's end anxiety together.
Hello and welcome to episode 178 of the Anxiety Project podcast. I am Brad Robinson. Today I have the great privilege to speak to registered dietitian, author, ultramarathon runner Michelle Hurn. We talk about diet. We talk about how diet heals the body. We talk about how diet lessens anxiety and alleviates depression. Michelle shares her story battling with anorexia as a child, growing up where doctors told her you have a 10% chance of survival and becoming normal again when she was suffering from anorexia, and how she managed to heal her body and her mind by going on a ketogenic low carb diet and eventually I think carnivore. For me, I don't talk about diet as often as I should be on my channel. I have been on a low carb ketogenic diet for more than 3 years now. I've been on a carnivore diet for the last 6 months, and my health improved dramatically. My mental health and my physical health improved dramatically, unbelievably so. That it's hard to talk about to somebody who hasn't gone on this low carb carnivore journey. And so in this episode, I want to deep dive into Michelle's life, whether it's her battle with anorexia and depression, and what she knows now as a registered dietitian. What's the path forward and how can we heal through food? Now, her book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, I highly recommend. I'll just read briefly the back of the book so you get a better understanding of who Michelle is. After years on a high carbohydrate diet, intense running sessions, struggling with an eating disorder, and feeling the throes of anxiety and depression, Michelle knew she needed to make a change. Does the one-size-fits-all food pyramid work for everyone? Are there other options, such as a low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet, that may mitigate our risk for metabolic illness and restore us to health? Could this way of eating reverse diabetes, alleviate depression, pave the way to heal eating disorders, allow us to age gracefully, and prevent heart disease? Why, as a nation, is our health failing? And why aren't the nutrition guidelines updating with the science? Registered dietitian Michelle Hurn dives in and offers easy-to-read information while covering the latest research and clinical studies. In addition, personal testimonies and actionable next steps offer hope and inspiration for you on your health journey. Now, let's dive into this interview with Michelle Hurn. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me on.
So I read your book, Dietitian's Dilemma, and I'll show it to the camera so everyone can see who's watching. Such a great tool for anybody who's looking to improve their overall health, physical. But for me, as my listeners know, I was trying to improve my mental health, going through anxiety, GAD, agoraphobia. But I guess the best place to start is your history. How did this all come about for you?
Yeah, and I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version. But 12 years old, I was diagnosed with anorexia. I was about 5 feet tall and 57.5 pounds. And so at that point, I went to inpatient treatment for 2 months. And, I was immediately put on a 24-hour tube feeding system. At that point, I had starved myself actually in a relatively short period of time. I was at a normal weight for my size and lost a lot of weight very quickly. And then, not only put on a 24-hour tube feeding system, but also fed the standard American diet. And I had struggled with a little bit of anxiety and depression as a very young person, but it went like astronomically, everything got quite a bit worse in treatment. I was prescribed 7 different medications. I was having anxiety. I was depressed. I didn't want to live. I was having all kinds of GI issues, diarrhea, pain. I remember, unfortunately, a lot of time in treatment, I was just kind of zoned out. I was on such powerful medications, and that was my first interaction with a dietitian. And I remember just asking these questions, why I don't understand, like, why am I being fed this way? Can you explain it to me? Because even as a young person, I knew obviously, clearly I had issues with food, but what they were feeding me, I felt miserable, and I was told as I did gain weight, and I am grateful, I believe that inpatient treatment saved my life. But I was told, like, hey, you know what? You're probably going to have anxiety the rest of your life. You're going to have racing thoughts around food. You're going to have these obsessive, thoughts, maybe behaviors. You'll probably, as an adolescent and adult, you may deal with depression. You may have recurrent suicidal ideation. So we recommend, medication. We recommend lots of therapy. And so I remember, even as a 12-year-old, thinking, like, oh my gosh, like, this is now my cross to bear. I'm going to have to figure out how to become like a high functioning person with anxiety. And I felt like, I did, I went through high school and into college. I became an athlete, and I had issues with food back and forth, but I knew I wanted to become a dietitian because I was curious. I wanted to learn. Like, I knew nutrition was powerful, but I felt like there was still such a disconnect because I had such, like I said, severe anxiety. And so to become a dietitian, you have to go through an internship, and then you get your 4-year degree, go through an internship and sit for the exam. And during the internship, that was the first time that things didn't really make sense to me. Like, for example, I remember we would go to somebody in their room that has diabetes, type 2 diabetes. And the dietitian would say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to teach them how to have 75 grams of carbs at each meal and 15 grams at each snack. And I'd be like, oh, wait. Can't they no longer tolerate carbohydrates? Isn't their blood sugar too high? Oh, yeah. Well, we're going to dose them with insulin. We're going to teach them how to use insulin. And so I just ask questions like, well, why won't we just reduce their carbs? Oh, no, Michelle, everybody needs carbs. Carbs are the base of the food pyramid. Carbs are important for the brain, and if they don't eat carbs, they're going to have to eat fat, and fat will kill you. Fat is bad for your heart. We have to use fat sparingly. But you're new, right? You're a student. So you observe. But I'll never forget my first time in the ICU. We were doing tube feeding for a patient that had a traumatic car accident, couldn't eat. And I remember flipping over the bag, and I'm like, oh my God, this is the same stuff that they fed me at that point 12 years ago. I was 24 in the internship. And now I'm almost 39, and it's still the same stuff. Tube feeding formulas, number 1 ingredients, maltodextrin, corn syrup solids, canola oil, and soy protein. So I just asked, I was like, wow, could that potentially damage somebody's system that's, acutely ill? Like, is that the best way to feed cancer patients, burn victims? And it was just like, oh, Michelle, it's all calories. You're thinking too much. Like, and so you become a little bit like, wow, like, you start to question yourself. Well, maybe I am thinking too much. Maybe it is just calories. And so there's this, kind of this dogma, and the dietitians are told. And I've talked about on other podcasts, we know the Academy of Nutrition, which is the governing board of all dietitians, is heavily sponsored by processed food. When I was a new dietitian, their number 1 sponsors were Coca-Cola, Hershey's, General Mills, and Sara Lee. They've now picked up new sponsors. They're actually, as of 2021, we're now sponsored by the National Confectionery Association. So we are literally sponsored by candy. Like, you almost have to laugh because it's so sad. But, and once again, these sponsors heavily influence continuing education, and so that was kind of my start into dietetics. But I was also an athlete. I was training really hard, so I personally was following a relatively higher carbohydrate diet. And I've always been relatively lean as an athlete, as a runner, but I suffered with severe anxiety. And, it got to the point in my 20s, sometimes I couldn't go to work. I was having panic attacks. I couldn't be around large groups. And so I felt like I was standing on the sideline of my life. I was having to do things to manage it. Like, all your friends are going out, well, I'm going to stay home. Or, I really would like to take this job opportunity, but I feel overwhelmed. And, if people haven't experienced anxiety, it may not make sense, but certainly if you have, it's just paralyzing. Yeah, and then I went into practice and I became really jaded after a few years because for the most part, my patients were not getting better. People with diabetes, it was getting worse. They were having now amputations, wounds weren't healing. And also in acute care, we were seeing so many patients. You have this huge list of patients you have to see. So you've got like 2-3 minutes with each person. And so I even brought that, when I worked in Colorado, I brought that up to my clinical supervisor and I said, I just don't have time. I do not have time to make any change with people. And she said, well, are you checking boxes? Are you doing what you need to do charting wise? I'm like, oh, well, of course I am. Oh, well, it's fine. So the message was loud and clear. It was like, look, we're not trying to get people better. We're just trying to get insurance reimbursement, keep the system going. And so, throughout my career, I took some hiatuses. I did a few different things. But kind of like, my big life change. I was in 2019. I was trying to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon, and my health just fell off a cliff. At that time I was 36, and I went from being able to run easily 10 miles on my long runs, 20 plus miles at a time, to I just started getting like cold sweats. I would go out for a run, 1 or 2 miles in, my body would ache. I remember I literally had to sit down because I was sweating so hard after like a mile. I went and saw my family doctor. Everything was fine. Talked to a few dietitian friends of mine. Like, oh, you need to eat more sugar, more carbs, more glucose. And so I'm motivated. I'm like, all right, I'll give that a try. And it was like, I went from bad to worse. My anxiety was so bad. Once again, it had been a while, started having suicidal ideation, I couldn't go to work. I was just couldn't make decisions of like, what do I eat? What am I supposed to do? Like, I was scared. I was like, am I going to have to increase my medication? What am I going to do? And then finally, like the come to Jesus moment that I like to call it is I had just a tough day at work. We had a patient pass away. I came home at like 2:00 in the afternoon. It's like, I'm just going to go lie down. And I fell asleep. And I woke up in the middle of the night. It's like 2 a.m. And my muscles just felt like they were on fire. Like everything hurt. And I'm sitting there in the kitchen like, what do I do? I've tried everything. I've tried ibuprofen. I've tried alcohol. What am I supposed to do? And I just, so at 2 a.m, I drove to 7-Eleven and got a bunch of ice and put it in the bathtub and made this like ice bath. So I'm crying. It was ridiculous. And my wife came in and was like, maybe we should do something different. And I was just like, that's it. I'm done. I don't want to run anymore. Clearly I'm too old to run. I was 36 then, like I said. And, it's interesting because I think sometimes like that point in my life, like if you had told me like that moment, like, hey, Michelle, you know what, your whole world is about to change. I would have been like, yeah, my whole world sucks. Like I can't run anymore. And I'm in pain. I was in so much pain, like way disproportional. I've run since I was 14, way disproportional to what was happening, just with training. Because I wasn't even running that much. I couldn't get that far. Yeah. And so the next day I kind of just, I kind of intuitively knew all these carbohydrates weren't making me feel so good. But even then I was kind of scared. I was like, okay, well, maybe I should try a ketogenic diet. Maybe I'm going to try a low carb diet. And I had been kind of, looking around on Instagram and trying to do some research. And I was actually really surprised when you look at like Google Scholar and some of the scholarly articles. There were some pretty good clinical trials on low carbohydrate diets and diabetes. And I was like, well, this is interesting. Like, no one has ever taught me this as a dietitian. Like, wow, we can resensitize people to insulin in 14 days, 2 weeks, and obviously not a full reversal, but we can start the process. And so I kind of got excited. I was like, I was just curious.
Yeah.
And so I decided, I'm going to adopt a ketogenic diet. And then from there, after a couple of days of thinking like, this is what I'm going to do, like mentally preparing myself, I came across the carnivore diet. And I was like, most people, I was like, that's the dumbest shit I've ever heard. Like, come on, man. Like, I like meat. All these questions. But this is what I would hope anyone would do. My health was so bad. And I was curious. And I was like, this actually kind of makes sense. This is how humans evolved. And so I reached out to a few people in the carnivore community, really grateful that they reached back out, just gave me a few like, hey, this is what I did. This is how it worked. And so I figured, let's do a 30-day trial. Let's try this for 30 days. And my only goal was like, I just want my body to stop hurting. Like protein helps it heal. Maybe that will help my muscles heal. But yeah, coming from the history of an eating disorder, my wife was like, no, absolutely not. This is eating disorder. This will set you back. This will cause all kinds of problems, which like, she's seen me try some pretty weird stuff. So she definitely had a point, but we argued about it, and I felt really bad because she cried, and finally she's like, whatever, you're an adult, this is not going to work. Mm-hmm. And I can't even tell you like why I felt so drawn to it, but yeah. So, I mean, that was my start. That was basically how I got going.
I see it all the time when I'd get a client and they would say, Brad, I just can't seem to get into these new habits or new behaviors, to them, they don't really know it's healthy. They just having a hard time breaking out of their unconscious cycle. And then I say to them, well, are your current patterns right now giving you the results that you're looking for? And they're like, no. Then isn't anything outside of the unknown to you, that's where you need to go? And so, for example, or in your case, the unknown for you was, well, there's this keto diet or this carnivore diet, it's causing you a lot of resistance because you're like, well, isn't this unhealthy or just meat? I'm like, all of these what ifs come up, but you're in a position where everything else you've been doing is just completely wrong. You're not getting the results you need. And so now that you've jumped into keto or ketovore, when did you start to notice that things were like, oh, this is almost like a magic, the secret key to life? Like, when did that start to happen, and what did you feel? What happened?
Yeah, and I have more I guess like hindsight now, like because obviously, like I said, my wife was like, this is not going to work, you're going to feel terrible. Yeah. And I had been eating such a high carbohydrate diet. We're talking like 400, 500 grams to go to basically 25 or less. Right. The first couple days were rough. Like I felt pretty terrible the first couple days. And then I remember I was driving home like the third day, and even like traffic lights, like, oh, it just hurt. And so, you come home and my wife's like, how are you feeling? And I was like, I don't want to be like, oh my God, I want to die. This is terrible. But I knew that people talked about like a keto flu, like your body is just transitioning, it's not used to, it's used to burning glucose. This is like, holy crap, what's happening? But I don't know, like I said, I just had this intuition. If I could redo it, and I would tell everybody like, oh my God, electrolytes. I didn't do that in the beginning. That was a big mistake. But then about a week, I'd say about 5 or 6 days in, I just noticed my body didn't hurt. Like I wasn't in any pain. And I remember having this thing like, wow, this is so cool. But then it was also like, oh, I'm not running, so maybe that's it. And then about 9 or so days in, I was in a meeting at work, and I remember, it's funny because, I work at that time in a hospital with a bunch of dietitians, and they'd come in the morning with their bagels and their oatmeal and, snacks. And I'd have like a pound of ground beef and butter. Like, oh, that's a different. So I remember eating one morning at like 9, and we had this long, stupid meeting, and my coworker was like kind of getting antsy, kind of shaking. And she, whispered, she's like, Michelle, I'm going to go grab a snack. Do you need something? And I was like, Christy, I'm going to have lunch at like noon or whatever. She's like, it's almost 2. And I remember thinking like, whoa, in no universe could I go that long without eating. Yep. Like I would feel dizzy, shaky, anxious. What am I going to eat? When, where, what? I was calm. And I remember thinking like, oh, this is really interesting. And then, 3 weeks into this whole thing, I came home, and my wife was just sitting there like waiting for me. And, you're always like, oh, are you okay? Am I okay? We're about to have a talk. What's going on? And she's like, hey, I need you to come sit with me. And I said, what's going on? And she said, I'm not sure if I like this way of eating yet, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you. And we were both just kind of like, whoa. She's like, I want to know why. We need to know why. Like, because this is either like a fluke, or this is something like we both should be doing. Like, we need to talk about this. And that is when we really dove in. And, she works in a hospital as well, so we had access to lots of clinical trials. And we were like, oh my God, what did you find? Like, can you believe they have, because all we're ever taught as dietitians is that the keto diet is only good for epilepsy. But we were looking at like mental health, we were looking at the bioavailability of meats, we were studying like everything we could find, started listening to like, Paul Saladino and Brian Sanders. And it was amazing. It was amazing how much information was available. And I remember thinking like, has everything I've been taught been a lie? And of course, just like you get excited. I'm like, man, this is so great. I got to talk to my clinical director about teaching patients. And of course, I was immediately told, like, no, in no universe are you going to teach. You have to teach the standard American diet. And so that was disheartening. And then kind of at the same time, though, I was home more because I wasn't running. And my wife, she likes reading in solitude. And she just kind of made like a casual comment, like, yeah, you should go for a run. You're bothering me. You're around, and I was like, I don't know if I can run without eating carbs. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to drop the ego. Like, I'm just going to go jog. It'll be fine. And I was able to run for an hour. And at that point, I'd had almost 0 carbs for a month. And that's when, she was like, oh, this is so great. You can be a recreational runner. It'll be fun. And I was like, what if I run an ultramarathon? Like, let's dream big.
Yeah.
Oh, God bless her. She puts up with me. But I feel like this way of eating gave me my life back. At that time, we kind of agreed, like, all right, let's not totally dive into ultramarathoning. But I connected with Zach Bitter, who's at that time was the current 100-mile world record holder. His record's been broken, so now he's only the second, but he felt it's a low-carb diet. So he explained to me, like, this is how it works. This is how, you can burn fat for fuel and feel better. And I was like, what if I've kind of stumbled upon something that could work really well for me? It could potentially work really well for other people. And it just kept going. And the more I healed, the angrier I got. I mean, obviously I was grateful for my own health, but I was angry at our healthcare system.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I became very angry. I'd go into a patient room that were suffering. Yeah. And it was like, hey, if you teach people about low carb nutrition, you could get fired. You could lose your license. And there became this huge cognitive disconnect, and I just couldn't keep doing it. I couldn't keep, and my situation was like, I was in a situation with like, how long can I do this? How long? And then COVID happened. And so I was a newer dietitian, and I lost all my dietitian hours. But they're like, don't worry, Michelle, we're going to put you in the call center. Well, I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Well, you can't do anything nutrition, but patients are going to call to order food, and you just take their call 8 hours a day. So for 8 hours, I had diabetics calling, ordering chocolate cake and caramel macchiatos, and people with heart disease calling, ordering, can't order meat or fat, but can order 144 grams of carbs per meal. And I just kind of broke. I was like, I can't do this. Like, we got to get out of here. So, once I financially figured out we could do it, I took a very large pay cut to work at a local place in Portland, Oregon, breaking down animals, making sausage, and that's all I did for months. Was I worked there, and I wrote my book. I wanted the book to be my story of working through an eating disorder, and what like the research said about things I thought I could speak really well on. I'm not an expert on autoimmune disorders or cancer, but I thought I can speak well on diabetes, mental health disorders, eating disorders, sarcopenia, which is muscle wasting, and heart disease. And there's also a chapter on where the nutrition guidelines came from, plants versus animals, because most people think eating plants is just like this magical utopia of health, which in reality it's really not. And people were curious about my running, so I just I threw a chapter in there on running. But it was a wild adventure. I'd tell anyone who wants to write a book, just don't make any promises with how long it'll take. It's pretty crazy, and it's hard. It's so different. I'm looking at how much you make in a hospital versus like my tax return this last year. We're talking like a fifth maybe. Just it's a struggle. But I've never felt like I was doing something more valuable and more meaningful.
Yep.
And and I've just been fortunate. I've been fortunate to be interviewed, with several people, and to be able to go speak at like Low Carb USA. And my ultimate goal is just that people have the option. I'm not somebody who thinks everyone has to do something a certain way, and I know there's nuances, but I feel like when we're presenting newly diagnosed diabetes, severe anxiety, depression, we need to talk to people and say, like, look, there is research, there are studies that say that eating this way can help you. And then we also need to be working with people about better, habit forming, coping skills. It's amazing how many people from the time our kids are little, we're teaching them to cope with sugar. Oh, you're sad, sugar. Oh, you're happy, sugar. Kids at school, chips and a Coke. It's like we've got to help people kind of unlearn these behaviors.
Yep, absolutely. There was you touched upon in the book something like a cup of spinach, we only absorb 1.8% or something like that of the nutrients. And then compared to a piece of steak where we're absorbing 20% of the nutrients. So what is it about this way of eating? So incorporating more fish, seafood, beef, eggs, even cheeses into our diet. Like, what is it? What are we getting from that is having such a profound effect over our physical, but our mental health as well?
That's a great question, because when I worked in 2 different psychiatric facilities, and there was kind of this dogma that like, oh, plant-based diets will make you really healthy. But like what people like, something we don't teach in nutrition is bioavailability. And what does that mean? Bioavailability is what your body can actually use and absorb. Because if your body can't actually use it, it is of no use to you. And like you said, like steak versus iron, like, one, they have different forms of iron, but like the iron that's in spinach, like if you just look at it and you're like, oh, well, if I eat this much spinach, I can get 50, 100% of my iron, but your body can only absorb 1.7% of that. So that would be like, if I wrote you a check, like for like $1,000, and you're like, oh my God, awesome. And you go to cash it and they're like, she only has $17 in her bank account. You'd be like, crap, that's stupid. That doesn't help, because it doesn't matter what I write you the check for. It matters, can you access the funds? It doesn't matter what's technically in the spinach. It matters, can your body use it? And that's where we've come to like a big problem in nutrition, is we're just, there's on nutrition labels does not show bioavailability. It doesn't show where your body can use it. So throughout evolution, humans evolved being able to, on meat and fat. We know throughout evolution, people ate small amounts of plants, roots, things when they were available, but they were a very, very small part of our diet. Humans, the human body, just our GI system, our digestive system is very good at extracting nutrition from meat, organs, and fat. And it is a huge mistake that we're doing in nutrition now, to be like, oh, instead of eating meat, you can eat soy or Beyond Burger. Like meat, it's not just protein. People think like, oh, I'll just get protein somewhere else. Meat has things that you just cannot get in soy. And when I'm talking B12, zinc, folate, and then a lot of the amino acids and trace minerals, things like carnitine, taurine, all these things have very powerful impacts on your brain. And they are not duplicated in soy or Beyond Burger. And beyond that, we know that a lot of plants, I guess probably the best way to break it down quickly is a lot of plants have things called anti-nutrients. Like nothing in nature wants to be eaten. Like if you and I go hunting and we like step on a stick, a deer will run away. It's like crap. Nothing wants to be lunch, and that includes plants. But plants can't run away. So what's happened over time is they've developed where they're like, they're actually they have defense mechanisms. They're rooted into the ground, so they can't move. But plants have things like oxalates and phytic acid that make them taste bitter, or they have hard seeds. So for example, I was anemic for many, many years, but I took iron supplements, I ate some meat, but I was eating so much whole wheat bread and nuts and seeds. Those things have phytic acid. It binds to iron and it makes it unusable for your body. So when we remove a lot of those plant materials, and if somebody's struggling with mental health, I think that at least for a period of time, 30 days, maybe a bit more, it just makes sense. Like let's calm your system down. Let's take out all that anti-nutrients and let's just flood it with highly bioavailable nutrition. Let's give it the meat, the fat, things like organ meats. And that's another thing. People are like, oh, vegetables, carrots, vitamin A. I mean, 45% of people cannot absorb the vitamin A in carrots. It's a different form than what you might find in like liver or some other animal products. Same thing with the vitamin D and K. The animal products are the ones the human body prefers to use. So it just makes sense that that's what we use and that's what we take in.
Right.
And then on the flip side of that, we know that, when you eat a lot of processed foods, it can actually alter your brain chemistry. Like this was news to me. This is the work of Georgia Ede, that when you consume a lot of processed carbohydrates and seed oils over time, it can have the same inflammatory effect as even like some illicit substances. It can actually shift glutamate in your brain up to 100 times. And when it does that, it actually prevents the brain from coping with stress and engaging in neuroplasticity. Which it's like, what does that mean? Like, well, one, coping with stress is kind of important. If there was ever a time in society we kind of needed to cope with stress, it's now. But like, if you think about, like, if somebody listening to this, if you've ever eaten like a big thing of ice cream or super carby, sugary meal, a lot of times what happens is you get that dopamine hit. So you might feel really good initially, and like it's almost like that euphoria, and then you can come crashing down really hard. you know? But also it like, you know, if your brain can't learn and take in new information, I mean, if you're trying to establish new habits, if you're trying to heal from an eating disorder, mental health, like, yeah. And here's another issue I have in healthcare is we constantly blame the patient. Oh, what's your problem? Why can't you get it together? Maybe my brain's on fire. Maybe you need to stop feeding me these processed foods and you need to, you know, feed me in a way. It's mind-boggling to me that we consider eating disorder to eat in a way humans were supposed to eat, like eating meat, fat, avocado, coconut oils, like, oh, you're a weirdo. But eating like a sandwich, Oreos, and chips, it's like, oh, that's normal. All things in moderation. Like,
Right.
ugh, it's backwards.
I feel like if you look at the history of human beings and what we've been eating for hundreds of thousands of years before we started to build factories and make crackers, cookies, cakes, pies, um, it's common sense to look at it that way, what we've been eating the most. But also, Michelle, do you have an argument for someone who says, well, you know, in the argument where you say, well, we've been eating meat for 200,000 years or way longer than that, um, but then the argument is from someone else's perspective, well, look at the lifespan of people dying at an early age, but it wasn't because of the diet. It was because we didn't have vaccines. The common cold would kill us, or all women dying in childbirth. So many different things. So, what is your argument towards someone who says something like that?
Yeah, because I mean, if someone said like, hey, you know, our lifespan is so much better now than it was, you know,
Yeah.
during the evolution, they're right. They're sure as hell right. Yeah, it was. I mean, back then we didn't have sanitation. Like you and I, you know, I guess I don't know exactly where you live, but I'm guessing you don't live in a forest or whatever. We're not going to get eaten by like a saber-toothed tiger. We're not going to fall off a cliff. We're not going to, if we get the flu or if we get a bacterial infection, we have penicillin, we have other things. So those were the things, you know, it was very rare in early human history to live past, you know, 35 plus years. And obviously now we know we live, you know, up to 78 years beyond. You know, interestingly, quick statistic, people with mental illness, actually, their lifespan is shortened by about a third. But my argument would be like those people, like you said, those people were not dying of heart disease. Like if we look at skeletal remains of, you know, especially the hunter-gatherers, is it's like, man, it's gnarly how hard they have strong, hard bones, you know, they have healthy systems. Nobody was dying of heart disease. Like if you look at the even traditional tribes, like the Maasai in Kenya or the Inuit Eskimos, I mean, the Inuit eat like 80% fat. I mean, they eat like well over and have zero heart disease. So it's like, that is not the issue. The issue, why people were dying early is just life was more dangerous.
But even if you look at people in the 40s and 50s, like they didn't have the body types we have now, right? And that wasn't that long ago. At that time, they weren't being told, oh, butter is not good for you. Where did all this stigma stem from? Oh, meat is bad for you, causes cancer. And then it seems like it's such a hard belief now because everybody I come into contact with who says, why do you eat meat every day? Or why do you eat eggs every day? That's going to cause a heart attack. And it's everybody who's saying that, like most people. Where does that come from?
It's kind of a long, crazy history. But yeah, no, I had a professor when I was early in college who was much older. I want to say almost 80. And I remember her saying like, man, during World War II, like we just ate all kinds of high fat stuff. We didn't know how bad it was for you. And I remember thinking like, what's exactly changed? You know, like, is it really that bad for you?
Right.
Kind of, I guess the quick and dirty is, you know, there's so much, and I have a whole chapter in my book about this, but I mean, it kind of started with this woman, Ellen White, like this woman who started this whole Seventh-day Adventist movement. She thought she had visions from God that told her that meat was bad. And then, you know, it's crazy and political. We go through World War II where we were trying to have more food for our allies, and we subsidized farmers. We subsidized wheat and corn. But back then, people still leaned on meat and fat and other things. But it was really more when we moved into like the 60s and the 70s, you know, when Vietnam was going on. Nixon, he wanted to get reelected. There was a lot of chaos. So he hired this guy, you can't make this name up, Earl Butz. And he said, hey, if we support the farmers, we'll help drive prices down. Everyone likes cheap prices. We'll just subsidize people to grow corn. Everyone was growing corn. And at one point they had too much corn. I'm like, oh God, they're adding corn to everything. Like, what do we do with all this corn? So Earl flew to Japan and to check out this new technology, high fructose corn syrup. We could turn corn into this goo that's cheaper than sugar, tastes like sugar, and extends shelf life. So we have that happening. And at the same time, we had Ansel Keys. This was considered one of the first nutritional scientists. And it was his hypothesis that animal fat and high fat, high protein caused heart disease. And he did what was called 22 country studies, but he actually left out a big part of his research. Anything that didn't fit his hypothesis, he left out. Like the countries that actually ate the most meat and fat had the lowest rate of heart disease, but he left that out. But back then, you didn't really have to, disclaim everything. So he painted this picture. Yeah, it's meat and fat. It's causing heart disease. So we have like all of a sudden, all this high fructose corn syrup being pumped into things. Where it's like, we got to lower, we can't have as much fat. Well, cool, not as much fat. Let's jack up the sugar. And then we had research coming out that sugar was actually causing heart disease. So the Sugar Administration kind of freaked out, and they're like, oh my God, we got to suppress this. So they paid the equivalent of what we today, like $48,000, to have two scientists like basically kind of lie and say, oh no, it's not sugar, it's fat. But once again, you didn't have to say we're funded by the sugar industry. Now you do. Now you have to disclose like, oh, this is being funded by Coca-Cola. And people ran with that article. It was published in major things like, look, it was kind of cherry picked. And so now we had all this stuff. It kind of became like the new dogma, like, oh, we have to have reduced fat. We have to have low fat. And you're right. If you go back and look at pictures of even like people on the beach and stuff in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, like people are lean. And now we started eating all less fat and more sugar. And we know, what does that do? That causes a blood sugar spike. Anytime, and this is like chemistry 101, insulin stops your body from burning fat. Insulin says, do not burn fat, store fat. When you eat a lot of sugar and carbs, all you do all day, store fat, don't burn fat, store fat, don't burn fat. And we basically changed the metabolic health of our nation. At the same time, Hershey's and Sara Lee and all of them saw great opportunity. And they got in bed with the Academy of Nutrition. It was the American Dietetics Association back then. And just basically bought dietitians, bought our education. And so, it's amazing that we have all this evidence. I mean, you can see a chart when the nutrition guidelines were published in the 80s that obesity has increased exponentially. Any human with half a brain, my 5-year-old niece could be like, oh, that's wrong. Like, we should do something about that, but they haven't changed it at all. Like, they just published the 2020 to 2025 guidelines. One, they use the word healthy 520 times in this 164-page document. But they're the same, the exact same. It's amazing to me. And they say all the right things, like we want to help, we want to reverse chronic disease, but let's do exact same stuff, So, and statistically, we're eating more whole wheat, we're eating more fruits and vegetables, we're eating less sugar, but
yeah,
it's such a mess. It's such a mess. And we literally have convinced an entire generation of people that this food that we hunted, we raised, that we evolved on is bad for you. And that this processed nonsense in a lab that we can show you, I can show you on a chart. I can actually freaking forget a chart. I can prick your finger and show you after having cereal, your blood sugar goes up, Right. We've convinced people that that's the way to eat, If you look at the back of a cereal box, wheat, sugar, corn, like don't eat eggs and meat that are full of nutrition and will keep your blood sugar and energy stable and, help you grow and develop. Have this sugar, water, flour, yellow 5 nonsense. Like, it's amazing. And people believe it. You get on any social media platform, there's all kinds of like, oh, try this. And then even worse, what the companies really brought from dietitians was the idea of moderation. And my wife and I just did a skit on this. It's like, what is moderation? Once a week, twice a week, once a day? Yes. Nobody knows what it is. And the human body and the human brain cannot moderate processed food well. It's literally somebody's full-time job to help figure out how I can basically get you addicted, light up the neurotransmitters in your brain with this ultra-processed food. So It gets me really frustrated and fired up, and I always encourage people, like, if nothing else, like, let's just common sense. What you ate all through, and I'm not saying, I think meat and fat should be the foundation for humanity. That's what we evolved on. And from there, add some whole food carbohydrates. Most of our grandparents had gardens, do some seasonal local things. That is what will, in my opinion, will help you be like a healthy human.
And when you read about these epidemiological studies, they cherry pick someone's diet. So if someone has a steak, French fries, and Coca-Cola, they find a relationship between the steak, right, and not the Coke.
This person ate meat this many times. That's why they're so sick. Yeah, epidemiology is the dumbest. Like, yeah. I throw all that out the window. Like, because one, you're asking people. It's usually like a checklist. People are liars. People are terrible at remembering anything, and they will lie to you in general. But also too, like you said, correlation does not equal causation. Yeah. Correlation is supposed to be a starting point. And what I mean by that is, like, let's say you and I are like, man, we think, let's just super devil's advocate. We're like, man, we think that steak is causing heart disease. So we do this epidemiological study, and a bunch of people are eating steak. We're like, that's our starting point. We say, like, okay, we interviewed these people. Then we would go and say, like, oh, interesting. They're also drinking 20 gallons of Coca-Cola, every week. Huh. I wonder which one it is. Let's tease this out. It's not supposed to be like you look at it and be like, they're eating steak and drinking Coca-Cola. Steak is bad. But that's what we do. And but that's not what makes headlines. People like, meat causes cancer. Keto is the worst. Blah, blah, blah. And I think it also just, I like to be a positive person, but I'm also a realist. We live in a capitalist society. You cannot make money healing people. It's very, very difficult to make money healing people. It is much easier to make money keeping people sick. Mm-hmm. If I heal you as a diabetic, like, I can make money off you your whole life with medications, with your eyes are going to go, I'm going to have to amputate, I'm going to have to, like, I can't kill you. I just have to keep you perpetually sick. It's really sad. But if I teach you how to heal when you can heal relatively quickly, then our healthcare system is screwed. So that's also why you guys watching this, you need to support your people that are doing the right stuff.
When you laid out the meal plan of someone with diabetes in your book, I mean, I was just, it sickens me. So what is a typical meal plan for someone who has diabetes? And what is diabetes, and then what is the meal plan? Yeah,
so I mean, there's two different types of diabetes, and people get very passionate about this. So for this purposes, we're not going to talk about type 1, which is 5%, less than 5% of people have type 1. That's not what's crippling healthcare. Type 2 is basically when your body is no longer able to tolerate carbohydrates. And there's a couple different things that could potentially happen. Either your pancreas is no longer secreting enough insulin, your pancreas is secreting a ton of insulin, and your insulin receptors on your cells, it's just not responding. Or sometimes, like, the pancreas just altogether is like, I'm done. Like, I'm exhausted. I'm not secreting any insulin. But for whatever reason, your blood sugar is high. Because after you eat carbohydrates, any of us, when we eat carbohydrates, we're going to get a rise in blood sugar. That is very dangerous to the blood over time. If your blood sugar is too high over time, that is what causes all the issues we see with people with diabetes. That's why, people whose blood sugars are in the 200, 300, 400s and they're not doing anything about it, you're going to start to have problems. You're going to start to lose circulation. It damages your arteries, your legs. You're going to start to have potentially lose your eyesight. That's why people with diabetes have a 2 to 4-fold risk of heart issues. So that's not good. So it's like, what should you do in that situation? Okay, I eat carbs, my blood sugar goes up, it's too high. Stop eating carbohydrates. Like, it's very simple. Like, we've completely overcomplicated this. But our current way to treat diabetes is to say, like, okay, well, we'll just have you eat consistent carbohydrate dosages, meaning the same every meal, and we'll dose you with insulin. And that will bring your blood sugar back down. But here's the thing, it's not exact science. Let's say you eat 75 grams of carbs for breakfast. I give you what we think is the 75-gram carb dose. We can check it 30 minutes later, it's still too high. Like, oh, crap, I'm going to give you more insulin. Check it 30 minutes later. Oh, no, now you're too low. Well, crap, now I have to have you drink an apple juice. Oh, shoot, now you're too high again. It's just, we're, like, constantly chasing it. And it's a mess. I mean, if you want a quick what we feed people, and it's usually, like, cereal, orange juice, banana, low-fat, toast with jam. Lunch is, like, pasta, chicken, salad, crackers. And dinner's the same thing, like, little maybe tiny like fish and rice, and there's always dessert and there's always something sugary. And unfortunately, it's like, how are you going to heal? We know hyperglycemia prevents wound healing, and these people desperately need more protein and fat. But and they're hungry too, because it's like you're giving them these foods that aren't sustaining. And then we blame the patient, like, man, you're just lazy. It's like, maybe we're not treating you. Maybe we're not really treating this condition very well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed growing up eating, I would have waffles, I'd have cereal for breakfast, I would eat pizza. I look back and most of my diet was, it was 80% carbs growing up. And I suffered from a lot of migraines, nausea, not as severe symptoms as you, Michelle, but and looking back, it was such a catastrophe because I had a lot of brain fog. I couldn't concentrate, restlessness, but also when I switched my diet, I've been now 4 years almost on a ketovore diet. And I noticed that the biggest thing that blew my mind switching to the diet was the fact that my mood is consistently stable, that I'm not reaching 2 p.m. and I'm like, oh, I gotta take a nap, or I'm not like pushing myself to do things anymore, but my energy is consistent. And was that like the huge moment for you, Michelle? Like when you switched, like no more up.
Like I was saying, I kind of felt like I went from feeling almost like depressed to like euphoric. It was constantly like riding this blood sugar roller coaster, and I would be exhausted by like 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Like if I did not, like I literally, it's like sometimes I'd be like, all right, I gotta finish this patient chart. No, I can't do it. I gotta get coffee. Like it was always worrying about, when is my next pick-me-up? I need something, whether it's sugar or caffeine. And even like I said with running, like I couldn't run at all anymore. And now I've run up to 50 miles and constant, if you had told me that at that point, like when I was so sick, like, hey, you know what? You're going to heal and run 50 miles. I was like, I can't even run a mile, So that's something too, that like you said, like mood too is very stable. And that doesn't mean that like life isn't like, it's so funny when people are like, man, I got to reduce stress. Like, well, good luck. You live in the world. Life is stress. Life is stressful. And obviously, if you're creating drama, that's a totally different thing. But we're going to have stress. We have to be able to cope with stress. When I changed how I ate, I was able to respond calmly. I realized like just how I handled life was so much better. And I've been so fortunate. I've interviewed and talked to some people that, had OCD or had other issues. And I'm like, I can't believe you had OCD. I mean, you're speaking so clearly and calmly. And I'm so fascinated and grateful by how the brain heals. It's like you can completely go from being, for lack of a better word, I mean, I was kind of an anxious mess, to being able to articulate and, just feel good and show up in life. But yeah, my life is demanding. And most people listening, like whether you have your family and career and whatever you're doing, you want to be able to be engaged and show up and to be resilient. Like before this way of eating, I was not resilient. I mean, I had several sinus infections during the year. I was tired. I mean, I felt like if a day was too overwhelming, I'd be in tears. And that's not to say things are perfect or easy, or I don't have my moments, but I feel just much more like calm and resilient as a human.
Absolutely. What would you say to somebody who's interested and open to the idea of changing the way that they eat? What's the beginning stage of all that? As a dietitian, Michelle, where do you start?
It's overwhelming, or it can be overwhelming, because we eat for so many different reasons, and a lot of people, and myself included, especially at that time, are eating for comfort, because it's like, my life kind of sucks. So it's nice to like eat sugar, then I feel this good at the end of the day. So I always say, like, before you do anything, before you change, before you whatever, I like to do what I call like radical honesty. And this isn't like being mean to yourself or judging yourself, but just taking like a quick inventory, sit down for 20 minutes or 30 minutes and just be real. Like what's really not working in your life? And that 3 a.m. in the bathtub, I remember thinking like, I'm short with my wife. I can barely get through a day of work without crying. My whole body hurts. I can no longer run. I haven't seen my friends in a long time because I'm too anxious. Like, things were a mess. Like, just, and this is just, that was reality. That wasn't like me being mean or whatever. But so yeah, just sitting down and being like, this is where I'm at. Because on your journey, I mean, it's not linear, right? You're going to have good days, bad days, up and down. It always helps me reflect, being like, wow, this is kind of where I was. And it also is a good reminder of like, I don't want to be this way anymore, you know? Because like I always tell people, like, your life can look completely different in 6 months. You can make improvements in as little as a few weeks, but in 6 months it could be night and day, right? So that's what I would do first. And I do think it's helpful that if you have the capacity to work with somebody, and it doesn't have to be like, you know, a $200 session person, but if you can find a coach or a health coach, they don't need to be a dietitian. I mean, somebody who understands the low carb, carnivore, ketovore world, that can be helpful, because just having accountability. But I do think, like, because we can, you know, anybody can help you kind of dial in the food type stuff, but you're going to have to be real honest about like your patterns, your coping mechanisms. And I also always tell people, like, whatever you decide to do, whoever you decide to work with, you need to set yourself up to where you can say, I'm going to give this 30 days. Like, it's not going to be better tomorrow or the next day. It'll probably be worse. You know, you need to, that initial period is tough. I get frustrated when people say, I tried keto and it sucked. Well, how long did you do it? 3 days, over the weekend.
Yeah, over the weekend.
Right? You know, we're such, you know, Amazon Prime can deliver something now in like 24 hours, right? Like, I can Google something, it's so fast. It's like, that's not really reality. Life and the human body takes time. And, you know, I like wrote that in my book. It's like the secret to success. It's so not sexy. It's like time on task, over and over and over again. You know, I usually race big races twice a year, but I run every single day. You know, I run hours every single day, and it's you're building yourself to get better. So yeah, if you're new to this and you're curious and you want to get started, sit down and be really honest why. And you can even write, like, what would you like dream about it. Like, what would you like your life to be? Like, you know, for me, I didn't think at that time, but man, I'd be like to run again. You know, I don't want to be in pain. I want to have steady energy. I want to be able to play with my kids, like whatever it is for you. And then, then connect with somebody. And certainly if you're not in a position where you're able to do that, like, get online, you know, go get on my Instagram or other people's and start reading, start asking questions, you know, get some resources going, because it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, that's probably my favorite part, is like literally for like a month, I ate a lot of ground beef, butter, and liver. It was very basic, you know, and it was good for me. It was good for me that helped me kind of let go of a lot of things. And then, you know, obviously also working with a coach can be good, because I think sometimes when you get a lot of healing, it can be like, you need to change and evolve, like as your goals change and evolve, and it can be hard to do that. Like, I don't want to change at all. I don't want to add back this or that. But,
absolutely.
So, yeah, that's what I would do. And you know, there's coaches too you can get people now that are like $20, $25 a session. So,
and so I guess the beginning step would be the main foods to avoid are sugars, grains, vegetable oils, and keeping your carbs under, what would you say, recommend at the beginning, 50?
Yeah, I mean,
50?
It kind of depends how your metabolic health is. Like, and it also depends, like, you know, if I always say there's such a difference between like, I'm 400 pounds and I'm diabetic, or I'm like severely underweight. But anybody, I do think the body needs rest. The body needs a rest from a lot of those fruits and fibers. So I think most people would benefit from a period of time of 25 or less, you know, maybe 50 if you're doing like some fruits and some other stuff would probably be fine. Yeah. But yeah, you've got to let your body like kind of adjust, using more fat for fuel, getting insulin kind of back in line. Because that is also, this is another thing we just don't talk about, is it's very stressful on the body to be having these blood sugar spikes and crashes. I mean, you're getting waves of cortisol and epinephrine and all that kind of adrenaline. So giving your body a chance to kind of like, woo, let's easy tiger this, you know. But yeah, I mean, sometimes everyone's different. You know, I kind of was just like, I'm done. I want to dive right in. Some people are like, I need someone to really babysit me. So maybe the first week you stop drinking soda. You know, like, there's not a quote unquote right or wrong way to do this. You will see results faster, obviously, if you're a little bit more aggressive. But if that, you know, if you know yourself and you're like, hey, that's not working for me, then you do what works best for you. You know, the whole, there's no like gold medal for you got there first, right? The whole goal is to be a more healthy, physically, mentally human being.
Absolutely. I actually stumbled forward in keto like badly, right? Like I started off eating a lot of dark chocolate and like you know what I mean? Like dirty keto.
I don't think it's super great. People are like, oh, you know, you can eat all this mayo. And I'm like, oh, you don't want to be eating like, you know, sugar. I mean, you can get 25 grams of carbs of sugar and just eat mayo. Like that's not what we're trying to do here either, right?
Absolutely. And then like when I started to, like I was eating a lot of peanut butter and almond butter and like when I started to, but then that's how I learned. Like I learned the hard way, and my audience knows that. It takes me, I get from point A to point B maybe over a year, where it takes you like maybe a month, right, to get over that. But I get there.
People ask me all the time, like, oh, my mom, my friend, my dad, how do I convince them? How do I help them? And you, honestly, you can't. Like, I mean, when I say you can't, I don't mean to, like, be down or depressing here, but people change at different rates. And, like, nobody will change by you, like, shaking them. Like, because I see people all the time, like, this would be so great for you. So the best thing you can do is be a living example. Yep. Because if you're feeling great, like, you're going to draw people to you. And just like myself, like, my health had to get really bad. Sometimes your health has to get really bad. And that way, you know, if somebody you know and love, their health's really bad, and they ask you and they're open to it, you know, then you can go in. But if you've been that person for the last year that's been like, you should do keto, they're probably not going to ask you when they're feeling crappy. Mm-hmm. So, you know, be patient. You know, I always default to compassion. That's just kind of a life thing. Like, regardless of what people are going through, just everybody's different. Everybody's going through a battle we don't know, you know, so I want to live my life as a living example and ready to help people that are ready to listen, you know?
Absolutely. And lastly, for those who think, well, you need carbs for energy. You need carbs to run marathons or to lift weights or, you know, to work the brain optimally. So you as an athlete, what have you accomplished on a ketovore, carnivore, low carb diet?
Well, I personally, I've been very fortunate. You know, I trained for my first ultra in 2020 and they just kept getting canceled. Yay, COVID. But I ended up getting to race at the end of 2020. I did a 6-hour timed race. So I won the race. I covered a little over 44 miles, 44.63. So that's an 8:04 pace for 6 hours. And then this last year, I went to the Tunnel Hill race out in Illinois, and I won. I was the first female. I ran 50 miles. And you know what? It was really nice at those aid stations while everyone's having stomach issues and eating a ton of carbs. I'm just a lot less, and I'm running through, you know? So, yeah, I mean, to answer your question, human physiology, we need 0 carbs to live, to thrive. That doesn't mean I'm anti-carb or I don't eat some carbs. They just ideally, I think, should be a smaller part of the diet. You know, the brain can run very easily on ketones. It does not need glucose to run. For somebody who is very active, growing, you know, you always have that person that comes back that's like, well, what if you've just been in a serious burn or car accident? All right, you know, the body can make all the carbohydrates it needs through a process called gluconeogenesis. Glucose, new genesis to make the beginning. But yeah, you know, so you really don't need carbohydrates for very specific uses. Like right now it's not that much, like 45, 50 miles a week. But when I'm really going for it, like 80 miles a week, I'll eat 50 to 100 grams of carbs a day. And I'll certainly take in more during my actual race. Mm-hmm. But it's very individual and specific to whatever your goals are. You know, during my recovery or downtime from running, I eat very low carbs because my brain, you know, I actually think the brain functions better just on ketones and on fat. Like you have so much more stable blood sugar and energy. You're feeling better. And so, you know, and if you're skeptical and you're like, I don't know, like, you know, Dr. Eric Westman was the first person that told me, like, Michelle, a low carbohydrate diet has more randomized controlled trials than any diet out there. Than the Mediterranean diet, low fat, low calorie, vegetarian, showing it's safe, it's sustainable, and it's effective. Yep. It works. It tastes good. We like it. People will not continue to do something that makes them feel crappy, you know, or they don't like. Mm-hmm. There's a reason, like, we continue to do this. It works really well.
Right.
And we're also like, I mean, we could go on and on about like what we're seeing even in mental health, like how some of the other benefits, you know, to your brain. So, I would just say, yeah, you have nothing to lose. And don't be a dumb bunny. Like if you're on medications or whatever, you need to talk to your doctor. Like if you're on insulin, you got to work with someone to figure that out. But there's all kinds of resources out there. You can get on dietdoctor.com. You can find a doctor in your area or a virtual doctor that will help you with the low carb. You can get health coaches if you're not on medications or you're not worried about that. And I would say just, I realize it sounds cheesy, like your whole life could be different in 30 days. I wouldn't have believed it either, but it's so cool. It's so great to just live again. It's like I'm no longer on the sideline of my own life. Like I can, I just traveled to Florida. I mean, in this last year, I got to travel all over and speak and talk, and like my anxiety and just my overall health would have prevented that, So yeah, I guess that was a long way of saying you don't really need carbs. Physiologically, you don't need them. I mean, and we know. I mean, you go back to evolution. People went for decades. Like, if you lived in the tundra, you didn't have carbs. You just didn't. So it's very silly that we've. That's why we have a lot of chronic diseases. Is because we've taught people that you need vegetable oil, sugar, and refined flour to live, and those are the things that are actually damaging our health.
And I recently heard from Sadhguru that the soil is not nutrient dense anymore. That like 100 years ago, you eat an orange and you get a lot of nutrients from that, I suppose. But compared to now, you have to eat 10 oranges to get the nutrient of that one orange you used to get. So that's the thing with like vegetables and fruits, is that we're not getting as much nutrients now because of what's happening in the soils as well. And for me to say like that, the more low carb I got, so the less fruits, the less vegetables, I actually started to feel better, like the less bloating. So I think, yeah, we can get all of our nutrients from meat, and the different types of meat, eggs, fish.
And that's another reason I think it's good to support local, support regenerative agriculture. If you're able to get a cow or, a cow share meat locally, even, if you do some fruits and vegetables in your diet, get them locally because the soil would be better. But like personally, I don't depend on plants for any nutrition. Like I don't say like, oh man, I'm eating this carrots for vitamin A. Like I'm, getting a little bit of carbs from my plant. I get everything else I need. I'm depending on the animals for it, But yeah, no, I agree with you. And I've heard that. And our soil is a mess, and I guess we could probably go on and on. You have people that are like, well, industrial farming is terrible. Yeah, it's not great. It's really not. And that's why if you're able to, you should definitely support regenerative agriculture. I mean, that's really what could save the planet. We could probably do a whole podcast on that. There's great, and if you don't live close to a regenerative agriculture farm, I'd get online and see if there's one close to you that can ship. Like White Oak Pastures is really great. I feel like there's, I want to see 10 or so in the United States that are much larger that have big operations. But ideally, I'm fortunate. I live close to Portland, Oregon. Like I'm actually driving Friday to pick up our cows. We always go through it faster. It's so funny. Like, we get beef. It's like, 100 pounds of beef. How long is that going to last? Like, a few months, to people. But most people are like, it should last you a year. But yeah, no, it's good stuff.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate you coming on. And for those who are looking to improve your mental and physical health, the Dietitian's Dilemma is a powerful tool that you need to have in your tool belt, right? Everything in that book, it's just, you lay it all, like it's so packed full of information, right? And that's why I say it's a powerful tool. So I recommend that you listen to it or you buy the paperbacks. And thank you, Michelle. I'm so grateful.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. And yeah, I really appreciate it. You guys are interested. That helps me out a lot. So Dietitian's Dilemma on Amazon. We got the ebook, paperback, and Audible.
Well, thank you so much. And take care. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Michelle Hurn. If you found it to be useful and insightful, please rate and review this podcast on iTunes. It'll help spread the message to other people who are currently suffering. And lastly, do not let anxiety define who you are. I will see you on the next podcast episode. Bye for now.
Brad's powerful anxiety recovery program is now available at at unpluganxiety.com. The Anxiety Project program is downloadable and puts the power of anxiety recovery in your own hands. Visit unpluganxiety.com for more details. Recovery starts now.